already from the University of South Wales, and I've been asked by Global Game Jam Next to do a few videos. This is the second one, which is found art. So before we start, what kind of art are we talking about? Okay, well, firstly, there's 2D art. That might be sprites, might be textures, icons, and tile sets, and so on. All very useful for 2D games, and some of them, textures, particularly useful for 3D as well. So the other things we obviously has 3D models, and we also have things like sound. So that might be music, effects, like that lovely coin sound when Mario grabs a coin, bling, or Zelda when Link finds a chest and opens it up. Those kind of little kind of light riffs. So all sorts of things. Probably other things as well, but that's pretty much what we're kind of looking at the moment. So the first question really is then, what do we mean by found? Generally, we don't tend to walk along and oh my gosh, there's an art asset on the floor. So what we mean by found is basically anything where we don't have to make it ourselves. So and the question then is, do we mean what do we actually mean things like free? Or what do we mean by free for that matter? Do we mean royalty free? So by that I mean the ability to use it commercially or non-commercially without paying any kind of license fee. Or do we mean really free? As in we don't have to pay anything at all. And in that respect, we've got this issue of the difference between commercial versus non-commercial use. And tied to that is the idea of licenses. I use the American spelling because most people will be American watching that. And you may have heard of things like Creative Commons. Okay. So in all this, and this will become more important when we look at the idea of finding this found art using Google and the like, it is all really how you're going to be using this material. Because some material, if you do say search for free sprites, free icons, and so on, quite a lot of the links that you'll click on, they're using free the way that often those emails that you get in your spam folder say free. Free thing if you pay this. You can get this thing free. So technically, they're not really wrong, but it's a little bit annoying when a good half or three quarters of the links that you click on for things that are supposedly free aren't actually free at all. In the same way that everything is technically free to download if you've already paid for your internet, but that doesn't mean it's free to use. So one of the big problems is often this idea of royalty free. I mean, technically that's what you want, is something where you don't have to pay to use it. But if you have to pay to get access to it, then that's an issue. And obviously one of the things about found art, I'd say you really want to err on the side of caution. You want to only use material that you know that you've got the right to use in the way that you're using it. So for example, RPG Maker, there's quite a lot of tile sets for RPG Maker. However, some of those tile sets for RPG Maker are only allowed to be used with RPG Maker. Similarly, things like Game Maker, some of the assets available for those, particularly the free ones from Yo-Yo Games, etc., may be limited in the way in which they're used. So that's a big thing for you need to think about, is like, in what way are you going to want to use this? And at the end of the day, one of the good things about found art is a bit like audio soundtracks in movies. Often directors will put in a piece of music they don't have the rights to use in the early kind of like private draft edits of their film. So it might be some music a bit like this piece of music here, and then they'll put that music in. And then when it comes to the editing stage, they'll then either commission a new piece of music or search for music that they can get the rights to. And occasionally what they'll do is they go, actually, that piece of music that I put in as my placeholder is actually the exact right piece of music. So now what we have to do is pay the thousands of dollars and pounds, etc., in order to get the rights to use it. So what you're really wanting to do is you're going to be looking for different areas. You want to have this idea of placeholders, which is art that's indicative, or music, sound, etc., that's indicative of the kind of things that you would want to use if you were going to produce this game commercially, or if you had to make everything bespoke. The thing to bear in mind is, of course, that some sites say, here's this free thing you can use for free, but they don't actually have the license to use it. And some of the problems I have with my students often is they find this lovely sprite sheet of Mario jumping, and they say, oh, it says on the website that it's free to use. And I say, yeah, it might be free to use, but they don't actually own the rights to Mario in order to legally distribute it. They may say it's free for you to use, but they don't have the right to be able to say that. If you put Mario in your game, Nintendo are going to come knocking at your door. Understandably, really. So when you're using placeholders, what you want is something that is free, that the person giving it to you has the right to give it to you, and that is indicative of the kind of thing you want. Now, obviously, you can go back later. You can always, one of the beauties of game engines is that you can always go back and replace the art, the tiles, backgrounds, all the textures with things that you actually can either bespoke, make yourself, or get made for you, or make sure that is actually freely distributable in a commercial way. Now, it's quite unlikely that most of the Game Jam games that are going to be made for the Global Game Jam, etc., are probably not going to end up as commercial products. But what you want to do is think of these things in a professional way, and at least have the rights to be able to distribute them without worrying about a C&D, a cease and desist letter, coming from some company's lawyers further down the line. So placeholders are important. Get the feel of the game, and then you can just get on with making of the game. And that's the whole point about found art, is to allow you to just get on and get going. If you don't have many or any artists involved, then it allows you to make a prototype pretty quickly. So some of the other issues here. So the first one is Google is your friend. But you do need to think about the type of search terms that you're using. If you say free something, it's probably not going to work. What you want to do is look really for recommendations for free services. And that, later on, what I'll do is I'll write up on the board, and I'll include a text file with good sites for icons and images and so on and so on. I'm sure you can find your own. But one of the best things to do is to use Google to find lists of sites that have free resources that might be useful. And there is a Reddit page that I'll make a link to in a few seconds, which actually has a list of all these kind of things. Obviously, some of them will be out of date now, and these things do come and go. And sadly, several of the sites that I looked at earlier today no longer exist, but are still mentioned in nice lists of good asset sites. So unfortunately, you will have to, shop around a little bit to get that. So really, if you do search just for things like free, you'll often get these royalty-free things which are actually still paid for. And I wouldn't recommend to anybody that you pay a lot of money, or indeed really any money, for art assets for the Game Jam. Use a lot of the tutorial site materials that are available for free with the game engines, Unity, Unreal, Stencil, GameMaker, and so on and so on. A lot of those are pretty good. But so really, Google is not your friend. Because you have to be quite selective in the way you're searching in order to not keep hitting all these sites that actually ask you for money when you eventually go to them. So just bear that in mind. I will give a list of recommended websites in a second. But the other thing to bear in mind is that we're at the Global Game Jam is ask your neighbour. Because it might be that you've got an artist. Oh, that's not very clear, is it? I'm going to write that again. Excuse me a second. Green doesn't show up very much. I'll do it in black. Ask your neighbour. Because it could be that an artist has a lot to do on the game he's working on initially, creating characters, tile sets, etc. But that will kind of drop off as the program has become more and more involved. And it may be that there's artists around your Global Game Jam website, Global Game Jam site, sorry, who are twiddling their thumbs and may quite like to do a little bit of a sprite or an icon or something for you, particularly towards the end of the jam when there's not that much for them to do. They've done a lot of intense work at the very beginning, but as time flows on, there's less and less for them to do as the programmers take on more of the activity. So, don't forget to ask your neighbour as well. And then I suppose the only other thing to bear in mind is to remember the format your engine uses. So found art is often not in the format that you want it to be in. So it might be in PNG and it needs to be in JPEG, or it might be a WAV file when it needs to be an OGG file. There's all sorts of ways in which you can actually reuse songs. You have the rights to do it. You can reuse these things. So you can use Audacity to change the sound format from a variety of different formats to other formats. You can use GIMP, which is a fantastic 2D art package that's for free, to convert things from one format into another, make the background transparent, and so on and so on. All sorts of resources for you to use. So just because you don't find something in exactly the right format you need for your game engine or your software, it doesn't mean that you can't use it. Again, so long as you have the rights to use that. And this is this idea of copying, because copying is copying. So a little while ago, one of my students saw this nice tile sprite sheet for an animated character for an orthogonal kind of 2D game he was doing. And he kind of used Photoshop to overlay the original image with his image and basically just reproduced that that walking kind of character sprite in different directions. And I said, hang on a minute though, because actually you're copying. He said, oh, but I'm just using the layer and then I'm doing my art over the top of it. And I said, yeah, but you've made a copy of that sprite in order to have it in your package as a layer for you to then work on. So really you're breaching copyright because you're copying his work. Even if you're doing it by hand over the top in a new layer, you're still copying that work. It's a derivative work. So do be careful to make sure you've got the rights to these things. If you've got any questions, I'm sure the site organizer or other knowledgeable people at your game jam will be able to tell you what's involved. And what's needed. Anyway, that's it really. Other than that, I'm going to speed up the video now. I'm going to wipe all this out. I'm going to write down a number of really good websites for you to get some access to some assets, and then we can kind of go from there. Oh, and I'm also going to include an article about the ethics of reusing art assets, because I'm sure you've seen on Steam there's lots of games which churn out standard marketplace assets in games, and they just crank the handle and make a new game. Can you get quite a few of those just been removed by Valve? But the issue is this idea of making use of marketplace assets, either paid for or unpaid for, to see to use in your games. I mean, there's an argument for a prototype, that's great, but a kind of finished final product that you're actually going to then start selling, it's this issue of whether reuse of art assets is actually a good thing or not. So I'll put links to that on there as well. Anyway, so the next bit is going to be me, just jumping suddenly to a whiteboard full of websites which are maybe useful as a starting point for you. Okay, and as if by magic, a load of links has just appeared. Let me just move them around a little bit so you can see them a bit more clearly. First one I mentioned earlier is the Reddit game assets page. I'll post a link with all this typed up so you don't have to just squint at my handwriting. Um, Reddit has a list of game assets. OpenGameArt.org's got some good stuff. It shows got some game free game assets. GameArt 2D has freebies as well as some of the sort of paid for services. And there's a few private kind of connections here. Kenny's got some art assets on it. GameIcons.net is a particularly good. There's over 3,000 icons there, all of which can be used in your games. If you're looking for tile sets specifically, Reiner's tile sets is quite a good option. But there's also you can do a search for tile sets on RPG Maker and so on as well. Just bear in mind that a lot of tile sets you can get online are actually from actual commercial games that have been ripped or lifted. So just be very careful not to use something you don't right to use. OpenGameGraphics.com here. And also, lastly, it's a bit sad really that Glitch as a game didn't do well commercially, but all the work that they put into the amazing pastel shades and wonderful procedurally generated characters and so on, all those art assets were made available by the company that created Glitch the game um, for free. So there's numerous resources there, wonderful, and I would highly recommend you having a look through some of those as well. So this is just some of this. Obviously, a lot of this is 2D, which is, I suspect, primarily what people will be looking for in found art. But of course, there's similar things for audio as well. Anyway, thank you for your time. Bye.